Good evening, everyone. Welcome to TIFF Bell Lightbox. My name is Keith Benny, and I'm the Senior Manager of Adult Learning here at TIFF. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the launch of our Trek Talk series, which is in celebration of the 50th anniversary, of course, of Star Trek, with tonight's special event, Trek Talks, an Astronaut's Voyage to the Final Frontier. So a few thank yous on behalf of TIFF. I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oréal Paris, and Visa, as well as our major public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. As a charitable organization, we'd also like to thank our donors and members for making TIFF's year-round programs, our educational and community outreach initiatives possible. I would like to thank the Mississaugas of New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, the original keepers of this land, for hosting us this evening and for hosting TIFF year-round on their territory. Tonight's event is presented in partnership with CBS and the Canadian Space Agency. We'd like to thank both for their efforts in making Trek Talks a reality. We'd also like to thank the licensing shop for their help. We'd also like to welcome all of the audience members joining us online via live stream at YouTube and Facebook Live. So welcome online audience and welcome physical audience here with us tonight. A few reminders: we ask that you please place your phones on silent. No photo or video is permitted, but we do have professional cameras capturing the event this evening. During the Q&A, there will be an opportunity for you to ask a question of our guests. We just ask that you please wait for the microphone to reach you before asking a question. So tonight we launch our Trek Talk series, one of our major initiatives in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. Writer and producer Gene Roddenberry and his collaborators conceived of a future where enhanced technologies, progressive values, and more tolerant social structures were powerful, hopeful models of diversity and cooperation. So it's from this starting point that our Trek Talks features roundtable discussions and keynote presentations that consider the influence of Star Trek in the areas of film, television, technology, space exploration, education, politics, and social justice. And so, to that effect, we'd like to invite you to join us for the subsequent events in the series. Tomorrow at noon, we're presenting a panel called Bridging Science and the Arts, which considers the relationship between film and television and science. Tomorrow at 6:30 p.m., right back here in the cinema, we consider Star Trek and politics as part of our panel on space, diplomacy, and the United Federation of Planets. On November 2nd, we welcome theoretical physicist and cosmologist Lawrence Krauss for a presentation on Star Trek and science. And finally, on December 5th, we welcome Mae Jemison, former NASA astronaut, for a presentation on Star Trek and the future. Please visit tiff.net/Star Trek for more information on this series. Okay, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest for this evening's presentation, Jeremy Hansen. We're pleased and extremely honored to have Jeremy here with us at TIFF for our Trek Talk series, taking time out of his busy schedule in Houston. Jeremy Hansen is a modern-day explorer. He began flying at the age of 17, eventually becoming an CF-18 fighter pilot. In 2009, Jeremy was selected from a pool of over 5,300 candidates to become one of 2 Canadian astronauts. Since then, his extensive astronaut training has included geological expeditions to the high Arctic, exploring alien caves, and conducting scientific experiments in weightlessness. Please join me in welcoming Jeremy Hansen.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for the warm welcome. I very much appreciate that. You know, I can definitely say that Star Trek has had a significant influence on how we imagine space and how we're living today. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it 50 years later, would we? And I definitely, myself, feel like I owe Star Trek a big thank you for the influence it had on my life, the imagination that it allowed me to see and envision how I might be a future space explorer. But, you know, where my journey to be an explorer really started was with the Apollo program. It happened before I was born, but I started looking at these images when I was a young Canadian. And I still remember when I saw for the first time, you know, this image of our planet. And just to take stock for a moment, this is the furthest that human eyes have ever been from planet Earth. In 1968, 3 astronauts left Earth orbit for the first time ever, set out for the moon to figure out how to navigate around the moon. And on their journey to the moon, of course, their focus was on their spacecraft, on the moon, on their mission to image the moon. And they had actually gone around the moon 3 times before. They had to do a maneuver with their spacecraft to do a burn. And as they came around the back side of the moon, the far side of the moon, on the 3rd time, they saw this. Imagine. And if you listen to the audio, they were absolutely floored. They were shocked. They weren't ready for it. They were scrambling for cameras because they'd been taking all these pictures of the moon. They hadn't thought to look back at home. And to see the blue marble hanging in space for the first time, they were awestruck. And they said, I think it was Borman that said this, after they returned, he said, we went all that way to explore the moon, but what we discovered was planet Earth. And I think this is something that inspires me to this day to look at an image of our planet and to realize that we really are all in this together on this spaceship Earth. And I still remember the image from Encyclopedia A, and I'm sure some of the people in this audience know what an encyclopedia is. Some of my audiences don't. But I still remember the image burnt in my mind of my encyclopedia set of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin standing on the moon, this image. And that was when it really clicked for me. I thought, wow, we can do incredible things. People went to the moon and came back. And at that moment, I decided that I would be an explorer. Now, an explorer has a lot of work to do. And so the first thing I needed was a spaceship. So I got to work on my treehouse. And it would no longer be a treehouse. It would be a rocket ship. And I needed ideas of what to do with my rocket ship. So where does a young boy turn? Well, we turned to film. And so I understood that now I would need controls in my treehouse. I would need a big screen up there decorated with planets and stars of places I would go. And I would need ideas for my missions. And Star Trek provided much of this for me growing up. And in this image, we see that, Star Trek gave us that first idea of how humanity would live off of this planet, how we would sustain life for extended periods in space. At this time, 50 years ago, we were just barely getting off the planet. And we certainly weren't staying very long. And now you could see through Star Trek how we could live and exist beyond planet Earth. And much to my dismay, now that I'm 40 years old, we don't have a Starship Enterprise yet. But we have built the International Space Station. And it's an incredible laboratory in space. The space station orbits our planet 400 kilometers above the surface. And if you want to put something in space there, it needs to travel 28,000 kilometers an hour if you want it to stay there. So about 8 kilometers a second. So that means it orbits our planet once every 90 minutes. So you know what astronauts do at night instead of throwing on a movie? They float up to the window and they look out. And in the time you and I will watch a film, they watch the most incredible documentary of their life one time around the planet. And it's something I haven't done yet. I'm a rookie astronaut. I'm getting ready to fly, but I just can't wait to experience that myself. And this is our school in space, our laboratory in space, an amazing accomplishment. And we didn't do it as one country. We did it as an international cooperation, but more on that later. But when you're on that space station and you want to look out that window and see what it is, this place, this spaceship that you and I live on, this is what you see. Those images that Chris Hadfield has taken for us and shared with us on his mission. You see our incredible planet. And I want to share with you some of that perspective, some of the time-lapse photography that we've taken. But in this, you're going to see, of course, the cities we've built, the clouds, the weather systems. You're going to see lightning. You're going to see the aurora borealis. But I want you to focus also on this thin green band right here. That is the extent of our atmosphere. That's it. You and I walk around here on the surface of the planet. We look up at airplanes in the sky, and at least I do. I think, wow, it looks like a lot of air. It looks like we have a lot of air. And then you look at it from this perspective, and you're like, wow, that doesn't look like a lot of air. That's a tiny bubble. And you start to see how, yeah, maybe this is plausible that we could be impacting this tiny sliver of air around our planet. And so it's an important and unique perspective to leave our home and look back upon it. And I want you to imagine that you finished your day of work and you float into that cupola, that area with the windows that you see here, and you spend some time viewing our magnificent planet. Isn't that spectacular? I know I was just a week ago, my classmates and I at the Johnson Space Center, we had the opportunity to speak with Kate Rubins on a video downlink, and she's one of our classmates. She's on board space station right now, and she was taking the video camera around and just showing us some parts of the space station, and then she took us to that cupola, to that area that you were just looking out, and she pointed the camera out the window, and then she said, you know, I grossly underestimated how spectacular this was going to be. She said, I've seen all the pictures and all the videos, and everyone says it's the most incredible thing ever, and I just assumed it was maybe not going to be that much different than the videos and the photographs, and she said it couldn't be more understated. She said it's the most incredible thing. She spends all her free time just staring out the window. And there isn't one of my colleagues that I sit down with when they return and spend a bit of time with them that isn't absolutely changed by that perspective. You know, that complete sense of seeing it with your own eyes and the emotions that one feels looking at our planet from space, and that realization that this is it. I mean, this is the only place that humanity exists right now. And this is our spaceship to take care of. And one team, you know, and the importance of all of us working together. And I think we really saw that in Star Trek, this idea of the Federation and the idea that we are in all this, or we are all in this together, and we have to work as a team. Star Trek showed us a lot of other things. In fact, you know, something that technologies that were pretty progressive in that time to imagine that these things would become part of our everyday life. And I don't even have to think back that far. In my life where these things really weren't a reality yet, or if I had a form of mobile communication, it came in a suitcase or a bag instead of a communicator or a cell phone. But it's also interesting to think about how much space has enabled and influenced these technologies, from the push of the space program to develop smaller and lighter, faster computer technology, from the invisible infrastructure, if you will, that allows us to operate this technology. You know, if I could turn off space for a day for you, you would be angry. We take for granted how much space has enabled us to have this amazing communication system, traffic organization, navigation systems, banking. The list goes on and on. Power grids. Space plays a critical role. And, you know, and Star Trek showed us some of these other conveniences as well. It's amazing to see. And what, you know, did these come because Star Trek imagined it for us? You know, perhaps. I think you could argue that. It gave people ideas. How about this one? This is kind of fun to think about it. You know, these were really great ideas, really well thought out, and here we are today using them in our everyday lives. The isolinear chip, you know, is exactly the same thing as one of our USB sticks that we rely on. And of course, computers that you can talk to and understand and turn on the lights or do whatever you need them to do. And we're living this today. Navigation systems. You know, a starship could roll up anywhere in our galaxy and know somehow where it was. And we don't have that yet. We're limited to navigation here on our own planet. But if I'm in an unknown city and I want to know where the nearest Tim Hortons is, I just have to pull out my phone and it tells me where it is. This is incredible. One of the things I loved about Star Trek was the information they could gather, how quickly they could learn about a new civilization or a planet. And a starship could rock up on a new planet and scan the surface, or if there was a dangerous area, they could send out a probe like in this image to explore it. Well, of course, we use these concepts today to go places that we don't want to go or aren't able to go. Like just recently, we launched OSIRIS-REx. Canada is a player on this ambitious project, and it's on its way to an asteroid right now. It's going to return a sample of the asteroid. Canada built the laser imager, if you will, so it allows us to create a very accurate 3D map so that we can sample the surface of this asteroid. And it'll take a number of years for this mission to complete, but we're going to bring back some amazing science. Asteroids are like a time capsule of our solar system, and there are lots of unanswered questions, and we're all very excited to see the results of this. Of course, you know, you and I We benefit from being able to image our planet from space, to understand the weather, for example, or to predict the weather. But also RadarSat, for example. This is Canadian niche technology, a satellite that can image our planet, can look straight through the clouds, can monitor our borders, can look at forest fires, can look at flooding for us, can do a whole host of things, but gives us situational awareness of our planet, just like the Starship Enterprise, when they would roll into orbit, set up a standard orbit, and scan the planet. And we do these things today in space. Other probes, more advanced probes, we send to Mars. While you and I are chatting, we have a probe on the surface of Mars driving around, learning about that planet, helping us unravel the mystery. You know, our leading theory about Mars, which I find absolutely fascinating, is that it had a much thicker atmosphere and had significant amounts of water, like lakes, oceans, rivers of water. What happened to Mars? Where did all that atmosphere go? Where did all the water go? And Curiosity has sent us back images like this, for example. So if you look here, you see these linear features in the rock record. These were deposited by liquid water, seemingly. And these images taken from Martian orbit, every warm season on Mars, we see these black lines show up on this slope. Seemingly some sort of a liquid solution, maybe briny water on the surface of Mars. So is the water, it seems like the water definitely was there. Is the water still there? We have a lot of unanswered questions, but why do I think that's so interesting? We're asking ourselves a lot of questions about how we influence that tiny sliver of atmosphere that you and I were looking at earlier, asking our questions about global warming and what are the real consequences that are at stake here. And Mars may hold some of those answers, may give us a really unique perspective. And I love the idea that we might solve that mystery by continuing to explore Mars and maybe ultimately sending humans there to do some of that exploration. Now, Star Trek doesn't get everything right. They show us here what it's like to do a spacewalk. You know, just throw on your spacesuit, go for a stroll, walking along the starship. It is nothing like that. In fact, spacewalking is one of the hardest things we do. And I love spacewalk training because it's challenging, not just physically. It's extremely physically challenging, but also mentally. You know, these spacesuits that allow us to leave the pressurized volume of the space station and go out and survive in the vacuum of space weigh over 200 kilograms. And they're very rigid to work in. They're big and they're bulky, and they're a balloon, essentially, allowing us to keep air pressure to live. And so when you have an inflated spacesuit, it kind of sits like this. And anytime you want to move from that position, you have to flex, you have to force against the balloon, you have to compress the balloon. And even like to open your fingers and certainly to close them, you have to force against that balloon. And it's okay for like 100 cycles, but fast forward 6 hours later, it's not fun anymore working in the suit. And so we do a lot of training in a huge pool down at the Johnson Space Center to simulate microgravity with that big heavy suit. And we actually have a 1-to-1 scale mock-up of the International Space Station underwater that we can practice doing maintenance on the space station. It's really quite a thrill, and I just can't wait. I mean, I love it in the pool. It's so much fun in the pool, but just imagine this. Imagine yourself hanging on by one arm, looking down at your feet, the Earth going by. I think that would just be absolutely amazing, and I revel at the opportunity that I might get to do that someday. Of course, Canada was involved in the space station because of our expertise in robotics. You know, we built the first Canadarm for a space shuttle. And there was a thought that if you had a robotic arm, you could do some really important things like release satellites, capture satellites, repair satellites. So Canada set a huge goal. We decided we would be the first country to build space robotics. It didn't exist. You have to understand, this is a big risk. This is visionary to take on that challenge. And it's not, you don't just throw out a robotic arm and see how it goes. I mean, nobody wants an arm on their spaceship that might knock a tile off or put a hole in it or wreck your space station and kill everybody. It's very precise work, and it's a lot of important engineering. It has to be light and be able to survive launch, which is very aggressive, but then it has to be in space and work and function. And so this was a big challenge. And we did such a good job with the first Canadarm we built, NASA said, we'll order 4 more, please. And then when it was time for the International Space Station, we were gladly invited along because to build that enormous space station, how are you going to do that? These are big pieces. In fact, the impetus of the space station was the fact that the Americans were building their space station Freedom and the Russians were building their second space station Mir, and both were in financial peril. And so the realization was they weren't going to come to fruition, so why don't we form a partnership, an international partnership? The thing is, they'd already built some of the parts, two completely different designs on opposite sides of the world. And when we finally decided we'll get together and we'll do this, we had to figure out how to make Russian systems meet with US systems for the first time in space. And I really mean that. We never flew them and put them together on the ground. The first time these pieces of magnificent engineering met was in orbit at 28,000 kilometers an hour, and they had to work. It's incredible engineering, arguably one of the most impressive engineering feats of humanity, and we did it in Earth orbit, and we did it as an international cooperation. And Canada's contribution is this incredible Canadarm2 that, how do you move your arm around the space station? Well, we could build a little train that it sits on. So if you look up here, it's connected to a little train that can run up and down a rail track on the space station. But that only gets you to some of the places. What if we, instead of having a shoulder and a hand, what if we make both ends a hand? So when you want to move on the space station, want to go to a new place, you reach out and you grab onto another spot on space station, and then you release the shoulder. And now that shoulder becomes the new hand. And you can inchworm, you can climb your way around the space station. It's a really ingenious idea. It's so simple, so obvious now, but that's very complicated in engineering terms. But it's a very successful design and allowed us to construct this huge space station in space. Now, we beat Star Trek here. So this image is from the series Enterprise, which came after Canadarm. And I don't know that they asked for the rights on this, but this looks an awful lot like Canadarm. And I don't know if you can see, but this looks an awful lot like a railway system running around here. But we don't mind lending them some ideas. They do have some other cool ideas that we haven't figured out yet, like tractor beams would be really handy. Right now, what we have to do is, when we have a visiting vehicle like this one, this is a cargo ship that comes up to space station, and it doesn't just dock to space station, all it can do is fly up really close and get information, and then astronauts take the arm and reach out and grab it and berth it to space station. So this is our version of a tractor beam, but it's a bit crude, I guess, in comparison. And I've hinted at this a couple times, and I think it is the most important benefit of the International Space Station by far, and certainly the benefit that is taken most for granted. And it compares directly to the Federation in Star Trek. You know, this concept that not just one species on one planet, one civilization, but multiple civilizations would work together in harmony throughout the universe, well, throughout the galaxy, I guess, is really neat. It's really progressive. It's very inclusive. And for example, in 1958, UN, so they had the UN COPIUS, which is the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. And it was the realization of humanity that, you know, we are going to branch out into space. And really, we should be thinking about this as a planet. As we leave Earth, we should really do this in cooperation. And so in 1958, we started to establish the laws and the rules that would govern the peaceful use of outer space. And Canada is still very much involved in this committee. In fact, we're the chair of the committee right now in the UN. And this is a neat image. This is the most people we've ever had on space station at one time. When the shuttle was visiting space station, you had 6 station astronauts and 7 astronauts from the space shuttle. So that's how we got to that number 13. But this is a very international picture. Every space agency represented in the International Space Station is here. So you've got Russia, the United States, Canada, Japan, and the European Space Agency, which represents many countries. But this is the product of setting a huge goal, a goal big enough to motivate society around our planet, to bring together a number of nations as a team to accomplish the most incredible things. And you can look in this photo and you can say, there are lots of times, and maybe even today, where we don't necessarily want to work well together with all our international partners, or sometimes we have concerns about what other international partners are doing around the world. But space is literally a shining example of what we can do when we do work together. How many people in here have seen the space station fly over? So quite a few of you. If you didn't raise your hand, this is your homework. It's really easy. You go on the internet and you just search for when will the International Space Station fly over my city, and you'll find there are lots of websites that will tell you. You just put in your location, and they'll tell you when to look in the night sky and when to look, where to look and when to look there. And it'll happen right after sunset or just before sunrise, so you don't have to stay up really late. And it is the third brightest object in the sky after the sun and the moon. You'll know it. When you see it, you'll know you've seen it. And it's a very bright object, and it's flying very fast across the sky. And that's why I say it is literally a shining example of what we can do when we set big goals as humanity and then bring that big team together to accomplish them. Now, we're learning a lot about health from space exploration. It challenges us to put astronauts in space and maintain healthy bodies. And Star Trek obviously showed us some very cool technology to be able to maintain health with Bones and all his gadgets. And Beverly Crusher. I was mostly a Next Generation guy growing up. But we've got some pretty cool tools that we're working on too. So this one is called Microflow up here in the top right, and it's basically a little blood laboratory in space that's portable. And you can imagine that you take your blood sample on Earth, you send it to the lab. Well, it's not very convenient for us to FedEx blood from space to the ground, so we're thinking it'd be better if we could just analyze it in space. And you can see how this technology would be useful in remote parts of Canada, places where you have to send your samples to get them tested. Astroskin, another technology we're playing with to give us more information on the human body and how it's reacting to the rigors of space. And here's that microflow experiment on orbit with Chris. And this is really the point of space station. There have been other benefits, but the real reason for space station is to learn, to do science in space. So when Chris is up there, for example, he worked on over 100 different experiments. But people often ask me, why do we do research in space? How is it different? Well, there are many reasons, but I just want to give you one visual, one that you will remember. We see things differently in space without gravity. And this is one of my friend's his own little science experiment on a Sunday afternoon. He took his earbud, and that's it right there. So this is about 2 centimeters across, this whole bubble. And he put some tape on it, and then this is a bubble of water on that speaker. And then he inserted a bubble of air inside it using a syringe. And all these little bubbles are just water bubbles that have made their way inside the air bubble. And then he turned on the music. So we see things differently without gravity. That's just one example of why we would do science in space. But the point is, if you're trying to solve a problem here on Earth and something like gravity is getting in your way, or somehow space can, speed up a process so you can look at it over and over again and get more data, like aging, for example. An unfortunate side effect for astronauts is that we essentially are aging about 10 times faster in space. For example, bone health is very much accelerated, or the loss of bone mass, bone strength is very much accelerated in microgravity because you're not putting enough stress on your bones. You're floating around everywhere. And this is something we obviously face on the planet here, osteoporosis. But in space, it's much more rapid. And we've been working a lot on it. We're learning a lot about this process and how you combat it. And astronauts, for one thing, we have to stay very active in space to maintain good bone strength. And so astronauts are spending about 2 hours a day exercising, either on treadmill or the equivalent of a weightlifting machine in space or a bicycle. And we see some other interesting effects too. So this is a cool Canadian experiment that I find rather fascinating. It's called MERO. And this is Tim Kopra and Tim Peake on space station executing the experiment not too long ago. It's an ongoing experiment. But basically, I met the principal investigator from this, from Ottawa, and he described to me that he's been working on this problem where he has all these bedridden patients for one reason or another. They either have a serious health issue or they are in some sort of traumatic accident, and they're laid up in bed for months at a time. And he's realized that it is really complicating their recovery from whatever else is they have, just the fact that they can't move around. And he was wondering why, what is going on? And he's narrowed it down to what he thinks is what happens in the bones is fat. This would be a regular bone over here, and these are enlarged fat cells inside the bone. And when you're laid up in bed for a long time or bedridden, this happens to your bones. Maybe it doesn't sound so bad, but what it does is it prevents the formation of your blood cells, which helps you heal the body. And so he's been doing these studies for a long time, and he said, so I'm going to be doing them in space. And so I asked him, I'm like, I don't understand. Why are you doing it in space? Why do it on astronauts? Well, you have all of these test subjects here on Earth. He said, oh, yeah, no, that's simple. He said, every single one of these is complicated. There are other factors. None of them are the same. You guys are all the same. You've been medically tested over and over again, and you're all perfectly healthy. And so I know what I'm seeing from you in space is not affected by all these other diseases and accidents that they've had. And so he is really excited about what he's going to learn from this experiment. And other technologies in Star Trek that we're not quite there yet, some of these cosmetic procedures. But I do think this is pretty interesting to talk about, the fact that we built Canadarm to do robotics in space, but now because of that vision and that huge goal they set, we start to see these technologies back here on planet Earth. These are 2 robotic surgery robots that are derived directly from Canadarm technology. And this one is a neural arm. We have a kid's arm as well for pediatric surgery. I particularly think this one is neat. This is a really clever idea. You know, right now, if you have a tumor in a breast and you want to biopsy that tumor, you take the patient and you put them in an imaging machine, and you create a map, and then you pull them out of the imaging machine, and then you take a biopsy. But you can never be 100% sure that you've got the tumor or the lump. But if you build a robotic arm out of a non-metallic material, you can put it in the imager. And you can image the patient in real time as you biopsy the location, and you can be 100% sure of where you took your sample from. I think that's a really neat transfer of technology. We could go on and on about all the things that Star Trek has inspired us with, unique technologies. But I love the idea that we got to travel beyond what's currently possible in Star Trek. For me, it still inspires me to think about what we have left to learn. Here's an image of a starship exploring the Arachnid Nebula. But we can't go to these places yet, but we can start to journey there with the help of telescopes. It would be great if we had these warp drives to get there, but we can't yet. We can't even conceive of how we would leave our own solar system, let alone visit another star light years away. But what about if I take you on a quick journey into the universe with some of the technology that we do have? And where I want to take you, maybe you can dim the lights for me because this slide is a bit dim. Where I want to take you is to the Orion Nebula. So Orion is a hunter. Here's Orion's head. There's Orion's belt. And hanging off Orion's belt is a sword. And if we use the Hubble Space Telescope and we zoom in to one of those stars on the sword, this is what we see. If I took you out into a dark place, not Toronto, unfortunately, but a dark place in the night sky, and I showed you the Orion Nebula, you could just barely make out one of those stars in the sword that I show you. You'd see the belt fairly easily. The stars are very dim. They're hard to see. But at best, it looks like one pinprick of light to you. But when we travel there with the Hubble Space Telescope, we see this. It's incredible. It's not one star. It's over 3,000 stars. It's a birthplace of stars. It's filled with dust and gas. And it's a huge place. If you were over here on the left side of the image and you wanted to fly to the right side, it would take you 13 years at the speed of light. And Hubble took this image, I'd say it was roughly just over 10 years ago now. But really, it's 1,500 years old, because that's how long it took the light from these stars, from this nebula, to get to planet Earth. And that is just one star in our sky. If I showed you the Milky Way, it would look something like this. And I want you to realize we don't really know what the Milky Way looks like, because we can't take a galactic selfie. We just can't do it. We don't have a spaceship that can leave our galaxy and turn around and take a picture. But if this were this is actually one of our closest neighboring spiral galaxies, Andromeda. But if this were the Milky Way, our address would be somewhere out here in the suburbs of the Milky Way. And Star Trek allowed us to imagine these things, but I also want you to realize that Star Trek all of the episodes of Star Trek only explored like a quadrant of our galaxy, the Milky Way. There's a lot more going on than just that one galaxy. And all the imagination of Star Trek, we still only explored a quarter of our galaxy. What if we took that Hubble Space Telescope and we searched the night sky for a place where you and I don't see anything, where it's completely black? So imagine with me just for a moment that you take a drinking straw and you look around. You're in the darkest place that we can find. And you look around and you find a place where there's nothing. And that's what we did with the Hubble. And this is the image we got back. When you look in the night sky, every star you see is in the Milky Way, essentially. Everything you're seeing. That's just our galaxy. Beyond our galaxy, with images like this is over, in this one image, that tiny chunk, this is about 10,000 galaxies. And each one of these galaxies, there's hundreds of billions of stars. And now with images like this leads us to believe that there are over 100 billion galaxies in our universe. And with numbers like that, you now start to realize there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on our planet. And that, for me, is almost impossible to wrap my mind around. And it just makes me wonder a little bit about what we have left to learn. And like I started with, I owe a lot to Star Trek. It inspired me. It allowed me to imagine. It still motivates me today. I watched the latest film, Beyond. I still love it. I still think that, it's just a great franchise, and it brings out some of the best of humanity. And for me, it's what space exploration does best. It's encouraging us to set goals. As people, as individuals, to set goals in our life. This has become very important. When I look back in my life, I realize that a lot of my opportunities have been because I set goals. And I shared those goals with people, and those people, they were my team. They surrounded me. They lifted me up. They told me I could, even when I thought I couldn't. And because I had goals and a team around me to support me, I was able to achieve more than I could have achieved on my own. And this is the one message I would leave you with, is that that's what I crave from space exploration for humanity, on humanity's sake, is that it allows us to set the biggest goals. We set huge space goals. And those goals are so big, they bring together not a country, but they bring together society, humanity. And when we bring these teams together of people, they would have done great things on their own, but we bring them together and unite them with one goal. That is when we seemingly achieve the impossible. And that allows us to boldly go. So thank you. So we have some time now for questions. We'll just wait for the microphones.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Yep, you're good.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. wondering, of all the astronaut memoirs, which is your favorite of the books? And also, one longstanding question for me is why the rocketry doesn't get more credit.
Interesting.
Because, I mean, to my knowledge, which is minimal, none of the catastrophes in the American space program were due to the rocketry and the fuel systems.
I'm not sure I understand that question, so elaborate a little bit more.
Well, just, you know, the rocket itself.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to Apollo, Saturn, Mercury, you know, the catastrophes that have happened, none of them were due to the actual rocket engineering. You know,
So the
there was a
design.
problem in the capsule with the Gus Grissom, you know,
Yeah.
explosion.
Yeah.
The tile business, you know, the O-ring business, none of that was in the rocket itself. To my knowledge, the rockets have worked perfectly, essentially.
Yeah, I guess that's a perspective. I'll answer the first question, though. You know, when I was going through the astronaut recruitment process, I was reading the book Riding Rockets, and it gave you a real candid view of life as an astronaut. And it just happens to be hilarious as well. Mike Mullane, the writer, he does a really great job. And that was really uplifting. That really humanized the astronaut program for me. And that's what it is for me today. You know, I used to lift the astronauts up on these pedestals, and because it's just what I assumed. But when I have to tell you, when I got down, when I was selected, I'm like, wow, I'm gonna have to really bring my A game here. I mean, they're really asking a lot of Jeremy Hansen. And when I got there and I realized, wow, we're all just humans. And that was a big relief for me in one fashion or another. So I think that one had an impact on me as well. Of course, Chris Hadfield's book, I think, is a great contribution. I feel like I didn't need to read the book. Chris was such a great mentor for me. You know, he shared so much in the time that we worked together, and he still does. He's still an important mentor, guiding me through this role as an astronaut. So I feel like I get kind of one-on-one training there. For the rockets, yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I never looked at it that way. You know, if anything failed on the system, always think of it as a system, like the whole system. And I expect there to be failures. You know, when I get in a CF-18 fighter jet and I go flying, I'm expecting failures of one system or another. And I expect that in space exploration. You know, the International Space Station I showed you, stuff breaks all the time. You think there's stuff breaking all the time in your house? You have no idea. Space is hard on stuff. It is a dramatic environment, and we have had some dramatic losses, and they're painful to think about the lives that we've lost along the way. But I think your point is valid in that the idea of humanity building a system to take us off the surface of the planet and take us to space is a great one that we've kept from its inception and we still use today. And if you look at SpaceX as an example, now not only do we live in a world where rockets take us to space, we live in a world where rockets come back and land and we reuse them. And that, to me, spells significant change in the very near future.
Just about, you were just tackling the question I was going to ask, was how your opinion about the public and private relationship with space going on right now with SpaceX coming into the fold. How do you see the future of space exploration with those two coming together now? And also, did you like The Martian, the movie?
Well, we are at TIFF, so we will need to tackle those questions. I love the idea of commercial space. It's always been the concept. The purpose of the Canadian Space Agency is to buy down the risk of ideas that will eventually become part of the commercial industry of our country. It's what we did. We were the third country to put a satellite in space. It was a communications satellite. There was a recognition that with a country as vast and sparsely populated as Canada, we would benefit from a space communication system. And now we have a very rigorous and respected space communication industry in Canada. But it was the government that had to buy down that risk before a company was willing to take it on. And that's what we've done with robotics. That's what is now happening with space transportation. Now we see that it's gotten to the point where companies are like, really, there is a market to send humans to outer space. Right now, SpaceX and Orbital are delivering cargo for us to space station. It's essentially FedEx. We pay these companies to deliver our stuff. We don't have to manage the rocket. They take care of all of that. We just send them our stuff and they fly to space station for us. And now in less than 2 years, we're planning to launch humans to space aboard commercial rockets. And it signifies significant progress. And I'll tell you why. The promise of these new rockets is to reduce the cost of getting to space by an order of magnitude. That is significant. If it gets cheaper by an order of magnitude to send things to space, we're going to be doing a lot more space. And a lot more people are going to be flying in space. And I'm always sharing this with our young Canadians because they need to make career decisions not based on the space program they see today. They need to understand there is rapid change coming. And they need to be, if they're excited about that, then they have huge opportunities ahead. The Martian is the last answer. Oh, is that what you asked me? My favorite one? No, you asked me. Yes. Did I like it? Yes, that's what I meant. I liked it. I loved that. I read the book. I saw the movie. I really enjoyed it because it was very plausible. There were a couple points where you kind of had to like close one eye, but for the most part, it was very well done, very plausible, and and we really think a lot about sending humans to Mars. We talk about it a lot. We talk about the infrastructure we're going to need. What technologies do we need to work on? What technologies do we want to test right now on the space station that are going to enable us to complete that journey to Mars and survive it?
You talked about setting goals. Right now, Elon Musk, he's planned that we go to colonize Mars in about 20, 25 years from now. What do you think about that? Also, would you think to go to Mars on the first mission with SpaceX? Mm-hmm. And also, what do you say for us as an individual here in this room to get ready or get prepared or help out to be ready to colonize Mars or maybe another planet? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Elon Musk's announcement for the transportation system that would take us to Mars. And a lot of people question that. But to me, what Elon did in that presentation, he's taken his huge team of people, they've given it a lot of thought, and they sat down to figure out how could we possibly afford to colonize Mars? How could this be done? And what we saw is they came up with the vision of the craft, the systems that would be involved to make it affordable to send masses of humans to Mars, 100 at a time. And the systems he proposed are like the movie The Martian. They're very plausible. They make sense. On a big scale design, they make sense. They're missing a lot of details. But that's okay. That doesn't make it wrong. Just this is a first step. Somebody, he had that vision to share that with all of us. And now other people that are visionary as well can say, oh yeah, I didn't know how to do that part, but I know how to do this other part. I know how we can come up with a system to protect the astronauts from radiation, and they can work on that. I know how to sustain and grow enough food on Mars to sustain a human population. And then you can start to bring in your team and all these other pieces to fill it in. And so I think, it's inevitable. We're going to go to Mars and explore it. I'm more of a round trip kind of guy. So I would be more like, hey, can I go, hang out for a while, come back? I've got a wife, I've got kids here. Mars, really cool place, to go explore, almost like a vacation, but it's kind of a crummy planet, as far as planets go, Earth is pretty awesome. So I'd really like to live out the rest of my days here for sure.
Hello. Yes, we have a couple of questions from our Facebook Live audience who are watching right now. So I'll give you two really quick ones. Jeremy, I would like to know your feelings about the last discoveries by NASA from Europa. And our second question is, what advice would you give to any aspiring astronauts, either in the cinema or watching at home?
Sure. I love the idea that we're finding so much water in the solar system. even as a university student learning about space science, and astronomy was not one of my specialties, but I certainly paid a lot of attention and did read about obviously the universe and the other planets, and we really did make the assumption that everything else was just desolate rock out there. And now we're finding, maybe entire moons made of water. I mean, how do we overlook this? That's really exciting. And what does that mean? Now we used to think Mars was the holy grail of finding life somewhere other than Earth. And now we're like, no, maybe not. Maybe Mars not so much. Maybe Europa is where there's life. And maybe it still exists there. So I love the idea that we're going to go explore that and find out whether life exists on a place like Europa. And then the second one was how do we prepare? Advice for people that would like to become an astronaut. I break being an astronaut down into 3 pillars that you need to develop, and you need people to help you develop in yourself. One is academics. It's pretty obvious to people. You need an academic path. And so you need to find something you're passionate about, you enjoy learning about, and you'd be happy making a contribution to that field. The second thing is what I would call operational skills. To be an explorer and to be into space is to be the type of person that can react well under pressure. And this is something that you develop in yourself. And so astronauts need to challenge themselves regularly. Someone going through life, I tell young Canadians all the time, it's academics is that first part, but now you need to go out and constantly find new challenges, and challenges that put pressure on yourself, challenges that will put you in situations where you have to make decisions that really matter. Not what you want to eat tonight, but like, do I finish the rest of this hike now, or should I set up camp here and wait for this weather to pass? Decisions that really matter. Or this is going wrong with my airplane right now. What is the procedure and checklist that I'm going to execute that'll give me the best chance of surviving this malfunction? Or this fire is going on the space station right now. Our attitude towards solving this is we're going to put out this fire or we're going to die trying. But what we're not going to do is sit in the corner and hope. We're going to be executing all the way to our last breath. And so to have the confidence that you can operate in that kind of environment takes experience and many challenges. So challenging yourself is number 2. And then the third one is just being a good human being. If you want to live in a tin can with me for 6 months, I have some very strict criteria. You have to be a nice person. And that's really what it comes down to. So somebody who has empathy and who works well as a team and who values, some of what we hold dear as our Canadian values, but truly values other people. And that's really important.
Thanks, Jeremy, for coming out and talking. This is amazing. I'm wondering, given the private-public nature or the relationship between the up-and-coming commercial space industry, and the fact that a lot of commercial space flights are going to occur with potentially you on board, or any other astronaut, how will you or other astronauts address any personal concerns for your safety with those, new systems?
Mm-hmm. So we're definitely concerned about safety, but the whole team is. It's to everyone's advantage to succeed, not just the astronaut who happens to be riding in the tin can at the top. And we have, a voice to bring from all of our experience to what we think is important. But we also have a responsibility to manage risk. You can't launch a human off the surface of the planet in a zero-risk environment. It doesn't exist. You don't accept the job thinking that it's zero risk. It's not zero risk. It's a managed risk. When I've had the opportunity to speak to some of our Apollo astronauts, I always ask them the same question. How did you get all that done in 10 years and so successfully? And to a person, they all say essentially the same thing. They say, we were going, and then we made it as safe as we could. And they really did. They're like, we're going. And now we're going to build as many redundant systems as we can put in this thing for as much weight as we have. But we should never forget that. you know, when you set these big goals, you have to realize there is big risk to be managed. And we're not going to do it without some failures along the way. We can't get people to work at home without killing people on the roads. Why would we expect that we won't kill astronauts? We are going to lose astronauts in space. It's a given. And we have to accept that. But we do have to be vigilant and not cavalier about it. But I never have that feeling in the space program from anybody. I get the sense that, hey, we are really going to do the very best that we can. So it doesn't ultimately concern me. You know, I know on the day, people ask me if I'm scared. I'm definitely not scared yet. It's too early. I don't believe I'll be scared on the day of the launch, but I do think the day before I'm going to be scared or very pensive. You know, and that day where it's kind of all come to a head and you're kind of done and you're ready and you're waiting, that's kind of the worst time when you're saying your final goodbyes to your family and you're realizing that, hey, it's go time. And I'm putting a lot on the line here, and I do believe that will be one of the scariest parts of space exploration.
Thank you. I afraid of finished International Space Station after 2024. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. What will we do after we retire the space station? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
So right now, we as an international community have committed to 2024 for the space station. And we don't have a concrete plan yet for what happens. So we will, in the next number of years, have to make a decision. Are we going to deorbit the space station in 2024? Are we going to extend the life of the space station? Or is there going to be some sort of hybrid model, which we've done a lot of talking about, will commercial industry come to low Earth orbit? Is commercial industry ready to start taking care of low Earth orbit so governments can now move on beyond low Earth orbit? Because we built a space station and now we have these years of heritage of research, there's great recognition now that there's a lot to be learned in low Earth orbit and a lot of learning that brings direct commercial benefits. And maybe even manufacturing of some things in low Earth orbit may be cheaper as the cost goes down of getting to space. And so definitely the goal at some point is to transfer this system to commercial, but we don't know how it'll happen yet. Will it be commercial will start to be part of space station and start to reduce some of the costs, offset some of the costs initially? Or are we going to just trash this thing and wait for commercial to build a whole new one? And that may be the best answer as well. So time will tell. I do know we've done the engineering. We definitely can extend to 2028. That we know already. We'll need some more spare parts, et cetera, but the station structure itself is definitely good through 2028. So we'll have to see what makes the most economic sense.
What, if any, effect does the geopolitical situation in Earth have with astronauts to the space station? For example, like there's some tensions between the US and Russia right now. Does that have any effect with American and Russian astronauts?
Mm-hmm. The answer is actually a lot simpler than the situation. The answer is no, it has no effect. It's really neat, actually. It's almost miraculous. And in a time when tensions have been high and there is clearly a desire to make a point, we have decided that space is too important. And all of this work we've done together, there's just too much to lose on all sides. Everybody loses in a big way. Nobody gains anything. And so essentially what we have seen is that the globe has said, we're just going to put a little bubble around space, and you guys just keep doing your thing. And it's awesome. It's really awesome. I mean, these are the same people that I've been working with for years. There's no change for us. The rest is just politics. And we go on with business as usual.
Do you foresee a time when China and India will also be part of the International Space Station?
Well, it's hard to say how it'll all work out, but I do see a time where, I mean, we're definitely heading in that direction. This is, one of the points I was definitely focusing on here is we have seen there's significant benefit from working together. And so that needs to be our goal, is that this is not just, a partnership of 5 agencies, but the partnership in the future will definitely grow. When and how, you can't see how that's all going to play out. These are complex political waters to navigate, and no one country gets to decide. But definitely there's benefit and there's merit to doing that in the future. So that's what we should all hope for, is we get to that place.
Hi, Jeremy. I guess I have 2 questions. First one about Falcon Heavy and it exploding. Is one of the ideals is to get rid of the Soyuz after a while if it is successful? And the second one, we went to the Kennedy Space Center and we were hearing NASA plans about capturing an asteroid. And I don't know if you are able to explain that anymore, but I didn't understand why they wanted to do it in any way, shape, or form. So if you could elaborate, it would be great.
So it was the Vulcan rocket that exploded a couple weeks ago or a few weeks ago, I don't remember the date now, was the Vulcan 9, not the Vulcan 9 Heavy, or not the Vulcan Heavy. But the Vulcan Heavy is just 3 Vulcan 9s strapped together, so it's really the same rocket. And so it definitely impacts that Vulcan Heavy test flight that they were going to have this year. And from my perspective, this is just operations. I mean, they're really pushing the envelope. SpaceX is really pushing the envelope. Every one of their rockets that flies has changes made to it. Elon's trying to get to Mars. And delivering stuff to space is just a step on his way to Mars. And so every rocket he launches, he's pushing the envelope, and that adds risk. And so to see some failures along the way is unfortunate, but that's just part of the learning process. And the fact that they're landing, the first stages of their rocket after they launch these rockets, I mean, this is significant. You really got to understand that. I mean, how rockets work, right? They launch, and when the first stage is out of fuel, it breaks off and falls in the ocean. It's trash, and then the rest keeps going. And SpaceX said, that's ridiculous. We can't throw away that huge piece of hardware. We need to land that thing and reuse it. And everybody said, not everybody, but lots of people said, and educated people said, you can't do that. I mean, there's no way you're going to land that pencil back on the Earth, and you have to realize that it's not just like it flew up a little bit and comes back and land. This thing was hypersonic above the Earth's atmosphere, has to re-enter the atmosphere, fly back and hit a postage stamp, either at the Cape or on a barge in the ocean. And they're doing this repeatedly and successfully now. So these are amazing accomplishments, and just bringing so much change to that industry. So if one blew up on the pad, that's too bad, but nobody was hurt. We can build another rocket. So I think that's all very positive. I lost track. Oh, the Soyuz. So if that is successful, so I mean, they're really separate programs. I mean, you have the Russians have their Soyuz heritage, and I don't think that the Russians have any intention of not being in the space launch business. So they will continue to fly their rockets. In fact, our going forward plan is that space station operations will continue as normal, but what we will do is we'll fly less Soyuz and some of these other vehicles. So we'll fly half out of America, and they'll continue to fly the other half out of Russia. So I don't know of any plans to not have the Russian Soyuz or a new variant of the Soyuz. I know they have some designs for a new rocket. And what was the next question? I forgot. Oh yeah, the whole asteroid thing. Oh, that's not obvious? Doesn't everybody want an asteroid? I've been on some geology expeditions where I'm like, I wish I could find a meteorite. I want a meteorite for my shelf. So the asteroid redirect mission is a design mission where the idea is you could send astronauts out into deep space and go to an asteroid and do research on the asteroid and then bring them back. But if you look at there are a lot of asteroids to pick from. But if you look at some of the better objects out there for this mission, you're looking at months and months in deep space to go to an asteroid with astronauts and do your science and then return to Earth. And that's a great goal in itself, to learn how to navigate in deep space, rendezvous with an asteroid, deal with all the radiation effects of deep space. These are things we'll have to learn on the way to Mars. But the other way to collect, significant samples of an asteroid is to go out with a robot and grab the asteroid and bring it to the moon, and then go there with your astronauts and collect samples. And that technology may be easier for us to do. We know how to build the robotic spacecraft to go capture an asteroid, bring it back, and to send astronauts into cislunar space is kind of on our roadmap to getting to Mars anyway, so maybe we would do both of those, and the astronauts will meet the asteroid at the moon, essentially, in lunar orbit, and do the research there. That's the idea.
Hi. So with both the Voyager probes having left the solar system, they carry with them mementos of Earth and kind of explanations of who we are. And with that comes art and music and all sorts of different things. What would you send if you were going to send something out into the universe that to you represents the best of us, or a part of us, really?
Man, these are tough questions. I mean, I would definitely think about it before I sent it. And I haven't thought about it. I mean, this reminds me of when I was in the, I'm cheating here and giving myself some time to think, hoping my subconscious will come up with something. But I remember in the astronaut interview process, one of the early interviews was via video conference. And Dave Williams, a Canadian astronaut, he asked me, you're launching to space on your first mission. What are you going to take with you? And I anticipated a lot of questions of what they might ask me about, in an interview like this, but I never thought. I never actually put myself in that situation where I was really going to space. I never given it any thought. And but I did come up with my Air Cadet Cat Brass. I would take Air Cadets is a youth program for those that don't know. And when you're 12 years old, you can join, and it takes you through your high school years essentially. And it's an amazing youth program. It developed me. It changed the path of my life. Taught me to fly gliders and private airplanes. Taught me leadership. It emphasized the importance of being a good Canadian citizen. I learned a lot in the Air Cadet program that ultimately gave me the confidence and prepared me to join the Air Force. And so to take that cap brass with me, was an obvious answer once I thought of it. Now, nothing has come up yet. But for what would represent humanity? If I think about what is the most important trait that brings unity to this planet, it's really love. And we'd have to find, some symbolism of love. I mean, what a great example to give an alien race, another race, is to say, the best attribute we have is to, the ultimate caring for one another as, individuals. And I don't know what that would be, a heart. I don't know. Maybe I ask one of my daughters. They're good at that stuff. All right. Uh-oh.
One more.
Just made it.
Challenges. What has been your greatest challenge, and how have you overcome it? And have you used any technology that has been inspired by Star Trek or anything else in the space program?
Yeah, life's full of challenges. I mean, I was emphasizing setting goals, and when you set a goal, you're here and you want to go there, and you always draw a straight line, right? And there are not very many straight lines in life. I guess, there's a few examples popping in, but definitely the greatest challenge I've ever faced is parenting. This is an evolving enemy. I mean, they are. Sorry, I think like a military soldier sometimes. They are constantly adapting and changing, and your strategies that worked yesterday don't work today. And it's definitely one of the richest experiences of life. It's also, without a doubt, one of the most challenging experiences in my life, and so important that you really, there's a lot of pressure, to not wreck these little humans, and you really do feel, at least I do. I don't know if there's other people out there that don't. I really feel like, boy, man, I keep wrecking them. Keep doing bad things. I could do better. But that's definitely one of the biggest challenges, for sure. Okay. That's one you can relate to, yeah. And what was the second question? Okay, you forgot too. We're good. Oh yeah, that's right. Hmm. Well, I mean, in that vein, it's communication. So, I mean, it's really neat, the fact that we have amazing communication from the space station. You know, almost any time of day, there are little windows, blackout windows, if you will, but I could call you on your cell phone at almost any time of the day on space station. I mean, we have that good a connectivity with the ground. We basically just use IP phone, internet phone, and I could dial your number and give you a call, and it would sound like you're a little far away, but not, you know, it's only a slight delay. In fact, on my birthday, when Chris Hadfield was in space, I got a call from them on my birthday, wishing me a happy birthday. And I was in our van, our minivan, right, cool astronaut vehicle. And it was on the hands-free. I was sitting in a parking lot, and it was coming through. I mean, normally it's a pretty clear communication, but it was just a little bit ratty calm. And I didn't know who it was. I didn't recognize the voices, and it kind of sounded like they were far away from the mic because there was 3 of them gathered around there. It was Kevin and Tom with Chris, and it kind of sounded. I'm like, it sounds like you're far away, and Kevin's like, that's because we're in space. So then I knew who it was, but so that communication is, you know, pretty incredible. That the thought that as a parent. My kids will know that they're out of reach, but I will definitely still be in contact with them and to help them and to have that connection still. It's a pretty important and pretty amazing system that we have. We use satellites. We basically bounce our signal off a geostationary satellite, whatever one we happen to be under at the time, and then it goes around the series of satellites and down to White Sands, New Mexico, and then across fiber to the Johnson Space Center, into a little computer sitting on a desk, out into the internet, and into your cell phone. So kind of neat. But I do, since we have a tiny bit of time left, I do want to mention a couple of really cool technologies that I think are going to change exploration. One of them, we didn't really see how they dealt with this in Star Trek, at least I didn't, was our wastewater. And to go on an exploration mission, you either have to bring a lot of water with you, or you have to learn to reuse your water. And I think that's pretty neat, because on the space station, we call it yesterday's coffee today, we recycle 60 to 70% of our water. So we capture all the urine, we capture all the humidity out of the cooling systems, and we lay out, any sweaty clothes or towels from working out, we lay them out so the water evaporates, we can collect that again, and we recycle it. It's a really important technology, and in a world where water we have so much, in Canada we're so privileged, but in other parts of the world, water is a much more coveted resource. And we're on the first generation of this technology, but it's expensive right now, but you can see where this is going to go, and eventually in the future, this is going to be a solution that we employ here on Earth. Another really cool technology that we did see in Star Trek, I'm stretching it a little bit, is the replicators. We have a 3D printer on board the International Space Station. And it doesn't print tea or Earl Grey yet, but we don't have to bring everything with us anymore. We just need to bring stock that we can make stuff out of. And we can build the parts we need in space. And this technology is still in its infancy, but this is really important. And Star Trek showed us that, how you would create the things you need. You don't just bring everything with you. And not only can you create them, but you can imagine that when one breaks, you can melt it down and now make it into something else. Or you need to make some sort of splint for my broken arm, and I use it till I'm done. My daughter got a cast today, so it's on my mind. And but when I'm done with it, you take that splint that you made for my arm and you melt it down and you make one for you when you need it, instead of bringing all the different sizes with you. Huge enabler for the future of space exploration.
What are you doing what are you doing right now?
You caught me. Well, I'm here.
And the second part of the question is, how many hours a week roughly do you spend doing that, like as part of your work?
Whatever that is, yeah. Yeah, the astronaut job, even when I was accepted, I hadn't really figured out what it is either. So it's a really good question. I didn't really understand what I would be doing. Your first 2 years as an astronaut is your basic training. And so it is just pure training all the time. They take you through all the skill sets. You got to learn, to be a spacewalker, robotics operator, understand the space station. It's very complex, all the systems, how they work together, what emergencies you can have, how you deal with them. How to repair the systems, become a good mechanic, how to fix the toilet, all these kind of critical skills that you need. So you spend about 2 years learning that. And then after that, you have to maintain those skills and constantly try to improve upon them. But I'd say that takes about 30% of my time. And with the rest of my time, I largely just am part of that team that contributes to space exploration. Right now there's 3 people on space station. And we've had a continuous human presence for the last almost 16 years in space. And I think people forget about that, but it's, we constantly have humans working in space. And, I think people lost sight of it when the shuttle was retired, thinking, oh, well, we're kind of out of the business. No, I mean, we got a lot going on. This thing is really complicated. And so for 6 people, typically we have 6 in space station. Next week we will again, as soon as the next Soyuz launches. We just had a little hiccup, a little delay there. But to support 6 people in space requires a huge team on the ground, of which I'm just one tiny part. And there's different ways I contribute. One of them is like as the Capcom, I sit in mission control and talk to space station, but I only do that once in a while, maybe a couple times a month. Other ways is I get put into teams who are solving a problem and they want the astronaut perspective. We're like, we're gonna go fix this thing, or we have this problem, this is how we think we should fix it. And they want somebody who's, I haven't been to space yet, but I've spent so much time training it and simulating it, I can give them that perspective of how I would tackle that problem and help them. So that happens quite a bit. And just providing leadership in the space program. And then with the remainder of my time, I travel to Canada and we take inspiring our youth very seriously. I probably spend about 6 weeks a year speaking with Canadian youth across the country and doing things like this, sharing what we think is this gem that we think we have, this treasure of space exploration with our fellow Canadians. So it's a pretty diverse job. I do a lot of flying too. Astronauts fly a lot because flying will kill you, and simulators don't kill you. So we have some really cool simulators, but on any given day you get in a simulator, you're going home to your family. But you get in a high-performance airplane, and it's all on you to make sure that you get home to your family. And that constant pressure, putting astronauts in that constant pressure is really important for us to maintain that skill set and to not let it degrade so that we're ready for the rigors of exploration.
One more quick question. I'm going to stop moving up to the mic, but yeah, we'll do one more.
When do you foresee that you will be making a trip to space?
Yeah, so I mentioned it. So David will fly in, I think I mentioned, November of 2018. So that's our next Canadian in space. That's coming up pretty quick. And when we have another mission for Canada, which I will fly on. But we don't have the exact launch date yet, but it's sometime between now and 2024. We just have to negotiate which flight the next Canadian flies on. And it could be anywhere in that span. So time will tell. So my job is to stay ready and support the program until it's my turn to fly. But I also think, all those changes that I've been telling you about that I think is really important our young Canadians know so they can make an educated decision about what the future might look like. I even think it's going to impact my career. It's one of the reasons we're hiring new astronauts, because we always have to predict the future. And we don't know exactly what it will look like. But when we look down the road, we see, you don't have to be a strategist to see this. Canada is a really valued international partner in space. We bring some really key niche technologies. We deliver on budget, on time. It's reliable. Canadarm has achieved way beyond its design criteria, for example, and does more missions than it was ever designed for. And so we're a welcomed international partner. And so whatever happens, wherever we as an international community decide to go next, Canada will be welcomed, and we're well positioned to participate in all those missions. And so we have to be prepared for this rapidly evolving space industry that I think we're seeing the beginnings of right now. And so that is kind of, if there is a worst case scenario of waiting to go to space, that would kind of be the worst case scenario. I might wait till 2024, but I can see a plethora of options that could come up and be great opportunities for not just myself, but other Canadians as well.
So first off, I want to thank all of you for your fantastic questions. They were wonderful. We're going to conclude the event tonight with a sizzle reel of Star Trek from CBS. But before we do, please join me in a big thank you to our modern day explorer, Jeremy Hansen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Space.
Space.
Space. The final frontier.
These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise.
Enterprise.
Enterprise, her ongoing mission to explore strange new worlds. To seek out new life and new civilizations.
To boldly go.
To boldly go.
Obviously having some technical difficulties on the ship, but it's a really good reel. It's fun to watch.
Space.
Space. Space.
The final frontier.
These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise.
Enterprise.
Enterprise, her ongoing mission to explore strange new worlds. To seek out new life and new civilizations.
To boldly go.
To boldly go. To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Celebrate 50 years of Star Trek.
Cheers.
With the limited edition gift set, get 30 Blu-ray discs featuring the original show and movies with the original crew, plus the animated series for the first time on Blu-ray, along with a 2-hour multi-part documentary. And available in this gift set, get a 50th anniversary badge, 6 mini movie posters, and hours of special features.
Is that all you gotta say?
And experience the Wrath of Khan Director's Cut.
Fire!
On Blu-ray for the first time ever, including nearly 30 minutes of new bonus content.
I would not presume to debate you. That is wise.
And for the first time in new ultra-slim Blu-ray sets, Star Trek, the complete original series, and the Next Generation complete series.
Sophisticated technology.
Resistance is futile. Surrender and prepare to be boarded. That will be the day. Fire!
Add to your Star Trek collection.
Let's make sure that history never forgets the name Enterprise.
Available on Blu-ray today. And look for Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness. Available for the first time in stunning 4K Ultra HD. Plus, don't miss Star Trek Beyond, coming soon on Blu-ray and digital HD.